was a kid, when I was growing up, I would go to my great-grandpa's house, and he lived in Sand Springs up on this big hill. When the weather got bad, nobody was going to see him, like it was up on this hill. And anytime we would go to see him, he'd either be sitting on the front porch whittling, or he'd be in his chair, in the living room. Either way, when I came in to see him, I would go to shake his hand, and he had massive, like, leather hands. He was a mechanic. He worked hard his whole life, and he would just grab onto my hand, and he just wouldn't let go. That was like his thing. And he just wouldn't let go. And I'd squirm around and try to tickle him or whatever, but like he wouldn't let go. But then when he decided it was time, he would let go, And I always kind of wondered why that was his thing. And, after he would let go, he would give you a hug and say hi and whatever, but that was like his process. And I always thought about that, and thing is, he was way stronger than me, and so he could have held on for days, but he decided he was done, right? And why'd he do this? Well, I think he was connecting with me, and he was showing me manly affection. This is how he did it, and he was very loving in his own manly kind of way. He wrestled me because he loved me. This morning, we're going to read and study a story in Genesis where Jacob wrestles with God and he prays a bold prayer. And so the text this morning is to be in Genesis 32. You can turn there now if you want, but I want to give you a little background on this, a little context before we jump in this morning. So God called Abraham to start a nation from which the Messiah, Jesus, would eventually come. Abraham finally had a son, Isaac, who had a son, Jacob, who stole the family blessing, God's blessing, from his brother, from the father, from Esau. But Esau, because of this, promised to kill. He promised to kill his brother, to kill Jacob when his father died. He's like, when Isaac dies, I'm going to find you, I'm going to kill you. And so Jacob ran away, which, we would do the same thing, right? Somebody says, I'm going to kill you, we run away. So he runs away to another place. He finds some family there, and he kind of started over his life. And he found some relatives, he got married, he had sons, and he actually prospered with God's blessing during that time. And so now it kind of gets you to today, 20 years later, after all that, Jacob, 20 years since he had cheated his brother Esau out of this family blessing. Again, and if you don't know the story, he did this by pretending to be Esau. He went to his father, who was blind, and he had some fake hairy arms, and he tricked him. And he stole God's blessing, his father's blessing. So now, 20 years later, Jacob decides he wants to leave. He wants to go back. He does want to be with Esau. He wants to reconcile with his family. He wants to go back. He wants to be with his other family and the flocks and everything that's there. So he sends ahead a gift. Kind of wants to butter him up a little bit. Sends this gift ahead, hoping that would help a little bit. So that's kind of the context. That's what you need to know to prepare you for what we're going to read this morning. But just by way of observation, as a 44-year-old follower of Jesus, many times God uses the transitions of life to get our attention. Many times, God will use the transitions of life to get our attention. We're going to see this in our text this morning. Maybe that's getting married. Maybe that's, having kids. Maybe that's getting a new job. Maybe you're an empty nester all of a sudden, or you're retired. Maybe it's just a new season. It's winter, or it's a new year, or it's a new week, whatever. But God can use the transitions to get our attention. And this gives us an opportunity to realign our soul with God. And these are kind of on-ramps, I think. They're on-ramps to hear from God and be led by Him. And I just want to tell you this morning that God isn't trying to hide His will from you. He has a plan and a purpose for your life, and it's way better than anything that you could come up with. So Genesis 32, verse 32 is where we'll start, and Jacob is in a huge transition. He's in a huge transition of life. There's a lot of unknowns. He's sort of freaked out, but he's stepping forward. And so the first thing that we're going to see, if you're taking notes this morning, is Jacob crossing the river, okay? That's where we're starting. Jacob's going to cross the river. So verse 22, it says, "The same night he arose, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had." And so, if you notice, he kind of helped his family get across. He helped all this whole line of people and stuff and flock, and he helped everybody get across, and then he awaited on the other side. Okay, so just want you to get that picture in your head. Everybody's over here. It's beginning, sun's about to come down, and he's going to stay on this other side and have a moment before he goes across himself the next morning. And so culturally, it was a common practice for people to have multiple wives, because you probably saw that and went, well, that's weird, he has 2 wives. Culturally, just a side note, he was tricked into his first wife, but that's a whole nother story. The 2 servants, again, culturally, common practice. They would have helped manage the household. They would have helped manage the flock. And 11 children and everything else he had and all of his stuff. I just want you to imagine this caravan of stuff and people. It's just a lot that's going to cross this river. Jacob had to cross the river to get back to Canaan. What rivers have you crossed in your life? What rivers have you crossed in your life? Some game-changing big moments for you. When God required you to take a big old leap of faith. For me, it's been things like 7 years ago, putting down the guitar and leading worship and picking up a microphone and beginning to preach. That was a big life-changing moment for me. Going overseas on a mission trip when I was 20-something, it changed my life. It changed my perspective on the world. One time I went to Fort Worth, Texas, and I basically just hung out with homeless people for an entire week and learned about the camps, and I learned about how they lived, and it really changed my perspective. It changed my life. For me and my wife, it's been things like fostering kids. It's been things like adopting kids. It's been things like moving to Enid to start Open Door Church. And even things like creating relational boundaries. Like, that's hard. Creating some relational healthy boundaries with people. Learning how to do that. So I just want to ask you this morning, what river is God leading you to cross right now? What's in front of you? What river is sitting in front of you? It could be really challenging stuff, like creating healthy relational boundaries with people. It could be things like walking away from addictions. It could be things like beginning the process of healing from your past, or grieving the loss of a loved one. What is in front of you? What river is in front of you? Maybe you get to this new year and you're like, we got to get out of debt. Maybe it's debt. Maybe that's the river that you need to cross. Or maybe it's just to let God lead your life. You're just at a place and you're like, I just want more of God. I want to understand Him. I want to walk with Him. Maybe you have a wayward child and it breaks your heart and you're like, God, help us know how to cross this river. Help us know what we can do. What's your river? For Jacob, this river was significant. He was facing his fears. He was facing the past. He was facing everything. This was well, here we go, kind of moment for Jacob. Now let's read about Jacob's wrestling match and bold prayer to God. Verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And so God, in human form, wrestled Jacob all night long. All night long. And when God saw that Jacob wouldn't give up, he punched him in the hip, and he knocked his hip out of socket. Jacob thought at first that this was Esau, I'm sure. okay? This is his biggest fear, is that he's going to have to meet his brother and his brother's going to try to kill him. It's dark, the sun's going down. I think he was like, shoot, this is Esau. And he just wrestled like crazy. But at a certain point, he realized, this is God. This is God. Have you ever felt like you were wrestling with God over something? Have you ever had that where you really felt like you're wrestling with God? This is an attitude that I believe many Christians are missing today. An attitude of, I'm going to stay here and wrestle God until he gives me what I'm asking for, until I have an answer. He wrestled with God through the night. When it comes to prayer, I think many of us give up too easily. If prayer is a spiritual muscle, like many of us would just be weak. We just give up. I want to tell you about a guy named Dale. When I lived in Claremore, he existed before I got to the church I started working at. And Dale, the only way I can describe it is he was a prayer warrior. This dude was 85 years old, and he was the most important part of our student ministry because all he did was pray. I didn't know who he was before I started working at the church, but I saw him out in the community sitting on his tailgate with his Bible open like this, just praying before God. And I was like, who the heck is that? Like, I always was just like intrigued by this guy. And then I started working at this church, and my friend who I took his job, basically, he went on to the mission field, and then I took his job, and he was like, Dale's the most important part of your ministry. Dale is amazing. He will pray specifically for you. He'll pray for the teenagers. He prays all the time. He's amazing. Dale had retired. All he did was pray. That was like his full-time job. He would literally sit on his tailgate in front of where we did our student ministry and pray all day. He'd pray for the schools. He'd pray for our church. He had lists. He was praying for stuff. I'll never forget the last time we went to Falls Creek Camp. Dale, again, he's 85 years old, okay? No offense, but that's old, okay? If you're 85. There was someone in the last service that was like 85, because they're 85. I think it's old. I think it's cool, but he was 85. And he hadn't really gone to camp much, but he decided he was going to go to camp this last year that I went, which was 7 years ago now. And he literally camped out under the stairs the entire time. He made a little holy of holies with sheets. He had a cot. He came out and ate food, and he went back into the holy of holies. And all he did for an entire day, for an entire week, for 6 days, is pray. That's what he did. He came to pray. It was amazing. And can I tell you something? There was a revival in our student ministry, and I attribute it to his prayers. He was pleading before God. It was amazing. And the year that we moved here, he passed away. And he was an amazing guy. He was a prayer warrior. Do you know somebody like that? Have you ever been around somebody like that? I hadn't up until I met Dale. Well, kind of back to our text, Jacob isn't the only one in Scripture that we see wrestling with God. I just want to give you a couple quick examples before we get back into our text. Jesus, he wrestled with God in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, if possible, let this cup pass from me. He wrestled with God. He sweat drops of blood as he prayed. Moses, he wrestled with God whether his presence was going to go, God's presence would go with him into the wilderness, into Canaan. He wrestled with God. And he even said, if your presence isn't going, we aren't going. He was wrestling with God. Abraham wrestled with God over the destruction of Sodom. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? And Abraham wrestled with God. He was like, there's some righteous people in there. Please don't wipe out the city. There's still some righteous people in there. He pleaded with God. But there are too many righteous to wipe out the whole city, is what he said. There's too many righteous. Too many to number. Let's keep reading. Verse 26. It says, then he meaning God, let me go. He said, let me go, for the day is broken. So the sun's coming up. But Jacob said, and here's the prayer, guys, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob said this to God after he wrestled him all night long. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Pan-I-El, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." So God tells Jacob, "Let me go." He tells him, "Okay, stop." They're wrestling. He says, "Okay, stop." The sun came up. Jacob, realizing who he's wrestling with, boldly declares, "I will not let you go unless you bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me." Jacob, his whole life, if you read back a little bit, his whole life had depended on his own cleverness. He had depended on his own strength. And he finally realized when he met God face to face, I can't do this anymore. He needed God's blessing to continue. He's like, if I'm going to cross this river, if I'm going to live this life over here on the other side of the river, I need God's blessing. So he boldly comes before God. When's the last time you prayed a bold prayer like that? When's the last time you came before God boldly? When's the last time you prayed with urgency? When's the last time you prayed with desperation before God? What are your prayers like? Maybe they're like, "God, give me a good day and keep me safe." Or maybe they're like, "God, break the generational curses that are in my family." Or God, expose my fleshly desires. Break my heart for what breaks yours. When's the last time you screamed when you were talking to God, when you're praying? When's the last time you cried? When's the last time that you were exhausted from getting on your knees and just praying and just giving it all to Jesus? Francis Chan said, if we never pray audacious, courageous prayers, how can he answer them? Jacob, to go back to our text a little bit, Jacob meant that the meaning of his name is heel catcher or snatcher. He was a twin with Esau, and when he came out of the womb, he grabbed on to Esau's heel. But that wasn't the last time he grabbed onto something. This is who he became. He became a stealer, a snatcher. This is who he was. He was a thief. And when God asked him, "Hey, what's your name?" God knew his name. "What's your name?" What he was really saying is, "Who are you?" He's a heel snatcher. He's a thief. He's an underhanded person. And what happened is God made him face his sin. He's like, "Who are you?" I'm Jacob. God made him face his sin. And then whenever he said who he was and he came to God with this bold prayer, God changes his name, signifying a new life. After his encounter with God, he got a fresh start, this blessing that he asked for. And he changed his name to Israel, meaning let God prevail. So who does Jacob realize he's wrestling with? It's God. He's like, it's God. And he says, I've seen God face to face. This is not God the Father, who does not have a body. It's not the Holy Spirit. So many scholars would believe that this is the pre-incarnate appearance of the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who wrestled with Jacob here. Theologians call this a Christophany. Christ, Phanos appearance, an appearance of Christ before his earthly birth. Some think it's an angel. I tend to agree with those that believe that this is a Christophany. So in Scripture, when it says that Jacob named the place Pan-I-El, that actually has a lot of meaning too. Again, we can see the Hebrew here, Pan, which means face, and El, short for Elohim, God. And so he names it the face of God. This place on the other side of the river. His family's all over here. He's all over here by himself with God, and he names it the face of God. The place where he met God, he encountered God, the face of God. The face of God. Pan-I-El, the face of God. This riverbank, this place where he encounters God, changed his life forever. And if you want to read his whole story, look at Genesis 25 all the way through 50. You can read the whole story of his life. And if you look at it, this was when he encountered God, when he wrestled with God, everything changed after this. He crossed the river and he wasn't perfect, but he made huge changes. God did something that day when he faced him face to face. Something happened. It changed his life, changed his name. Now let's look at Jacob's reminders from this wrestling match in these last couple verses here. Verse 31 and 32, it says, "The sun rose up upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh." Jacob's limping is a reminder of his encounter with God. The people of Israel did not eat the hip socket of an animal as a reminder, and what's crazy is the Jewish people to this day still, to honor this story, to honor God, do not eat of the hip socket of an animal. What reminders do you have of the times or the moments that you've had with God that were life-changing? What reminders do you have? Maybe it's a picture that you keep of camp. This is camp from this last year with our student ministry. Maybe it's a picture like, man, God did something that week in my heart. Maybe it's a mission trip, a picture or something. And maybe it's a date where you're like, that's when I gave my life to Jesus, or that's when I was baptized. And you never forget it. You're like, that was the moment I got in front of my church family and the whole world and said, I want to follow Jesus till I die. Maybe it's a journal that you've kept. You're like, man, God did stuff during this time in my life. I'm never getting rid of this journal. I always want to look back on it and know what God did. Maybe it's some stuff you underlined in your Bible. This week, I was reading in Proverbs, and I had written some stuff in the crack of my Bible that I needed that reminder. I forgot. And it just came alive to me, like I never read it before. I needed that reminder. What kind of reminders do you have of moments with God, of these big moments, these river-crossing moments with God? If we're honest, I think many of us would have to say, instead of praying and not giving up, praying long, we give up. We just give up. We're like, I don't know. Didn't work out, I guess. Instead of praying urgently, we just kind of pray these laid-back prayers. God, you do whatever. We don't strive. We don't get in there with God and pray urgently. Instead of praying desperate prayers of desperation, we look for backup plans. We're like, you know what? I'll just get a credit card. You know what? I think I'm going to read this self-help book real quick. This will kind of fix my problems. We look for strategies. Instead of God, I'm desperate. I don't know what to do. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for you. Will you move in my life? I'm desperate. When is the last time you cried out to God and you wrestled with him? You really wrestled with him. When's the last time? Maybe you came before God and you're like, God, I'm not okay with this. God, I'm not okay. I'm pleading with you. I'm desperate for you to answer my prayers, God. Mark Batterson, he's an author, a pastor, and a church planner, somebody that's inspired me. He has some good perspective on prayer. He said this: God isn't offended by your biggest dreams or your boldest prayers. He's offended by anything less. He also says, be specific in what you're asking God for from God. Most people don't know when God answers a prayer because they aren't praying, they're just praying general prayers. What's your prayer life like? Are you boldly coming before God with specific prayers? Are you desperate? What's your prayer life like? I love Hebrews 4:16. It says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Let us then with confidence draw near to God. Confidence in who he is. He's the God of the universe. He's the creator of all things. He's our Father. He's our shepherd. Confidence in who we are. We are his children, and he loves us. And we can boldly come before him with our requests and know that he loves us. He cares about us. He wants to hear it. He already knows about it. He just wants us to be honest before him. What do you need to bring boldly to God this morning? What's going on, man? What's going on in your life? What's going on? What do you need? When it comes to, you need some grace, you need some mercy, you need some direction. Maybe it's in your marriage, maybe it's in a relationship. Maybe it's just your relationship with God. Maybe it's your health or your future. Maybe it's parenting. What river's in front of you this morning? Like, what is it? We all got stuff, guys. What's the river in front of you? As we close this morning, I just want to take a minute and just say that in a room this size, I believe that there's probably some people in here. It's very likely that some of you are struggling to find joy in your life. You're struggling to find joy. Maybe life has just been a stinking struggle. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's your job, family. Maybe you're struggling with an addiction. I don't know. Maybe it's something that happened a long time ago. Can I tell you this morning that God knows about your situation? He loves you so much. And all he wants to do is, like a father, he just wants to wrap you up in his arms and just hold you and comfort you and lead you and guide you. Forgive you. But God wants us to come clean with him. He already knows. He wants us to come clean. He wants us to surrender whatever it is and tell him that you need him. For some in this room, that's salvation. Like, you don't have a relationship with God and you need to come to him and say, I need you. I need my sin forgiven. I don't know you. For some, you're just so far from God. You've let the things of this world, sin, just distractions, whatever, keep you from having a close relationship with God. For some of you, it's just coming back. Maybe it's just been a slow drift. You woke up one day and you're like, man, I am so far from God. I hate this. 1 Peter 5:7, it says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. You know, you can't add a single hour to your life by worrying about stuff. God says, whatever it is, cast it on me. Give it to me. Romans 8:31, it says, if God is for us, who can be against us? The Kevin Heisey translation says, if God is for us, who cares who's against us? Right? Who cares? It doesn't matter. If God is for us, that's all that matters. This morning, I just want you to close your eyes, and I want you to visualize this big, fat river that's in front of you. I don't know what it is, but you know. I want you to visualize that. Maybe that's a relationship. Maybe that's an addiction. Maybe that's a person. Whatever it is, I just want you this morning to say, God, I give it to you. I surrender to you. I can't do this. I can't do this without you, and I don't want to. I'm not going to. Just surrender it to him, whatever it is. Maybe for you, it's trying to plan a family and it's just not working out. Maybe you long to be married and that has not happened yet. Maybe it's that you just want to live a day without anxiety or a day without depression. Will you just surrender that to God this morning? He's a good father. He's a good shepherd. He loves you. He just wants to wrap you up in his arms this morning.